Delighted to welcome Louis Cooper, who's the Chief Executive of the Non-Executive Directors Association, NEDA, who'll be talking about how you can use the skills you've developed working in finance and treasury to take up a non-executive director role if you haven't already. Always useful information at whatever stage of life we're at. So just to welcome Louis, and if I could remind people to turn their cameras off as they join. Louis, if you would care to, people have seen your bio, but if you'd like to give maybe a brief introduction to yourself, why you're passionate about non-executive director roles in general, and maybe share something personal, something about yourself that people may not know, because we always find with these virtual sessions, warming things up a bit to talk about something human is always a rather nice way to set things off. So over to you, Louis.
Caroline, thank you very much, and welcome to everyone on the call. So yes, I'm Louis Cooper. I'm the CEO of the Non-Executive Directors Association. I started life as a teacher, so from a personal background. My initial work was as a PE teacher. I sort of helped pupils with sort of kicking balls and running around fields and things. And then I saw the light and trained as a chartered accountant, which was a bit of a strange move. But I qualified as a chartered accountant. I've been through all the big four accounting firms in various guises. And I then became a partner in one of the mid-tier firms, very much focused on governance, risk and assurance services. And at the same time also, I took on some board roles. So I've worked as a listed company board member and helped to set up NEDA at that stage. And the first thing that we did was to write a book. We've now got our 5th edition, which we're moving towards our 6th edition in the new year. So we're just plotting that at the moment. But we're very much a members association that looks after the interests of non-executive directors and really help NEDs from cradle to grave. And we very much focus on the important areas of training, education, advice, support, coaching, mentoring, networking. So we're not a recruitment centered organization. We're very much focused on everything else around the role in terms of helping people to navigate their course in terms of being a non-executive director. And I think it's quite a topical area at the moment. A lot of people have, I think, during the pandemic, started to think about their career options and other opportunities that they can take in terms of where they might think about different aspects of having more of a portfolio career. And I think NED activity has benefited from that, and a lot of people thinking about what that entails. And that's really what we wanted to focus on today in terms of the background and the route to becoming a non-executive director.
Great, well, thank you, Louis, and I'm really looking forward to the session. I can see everyone else is too by the great attendance today. I shall also be, I'm a non-executive director myself in various different roles. I will also be getting onto your website later and seeing how to join, because it sounds like a good place to be with constant changes in environment. So I think you need to stay in touch really as a non-executive director. Now, many of our audience will also have NED positions as part of our portfolio career, or simply in addition to the day job, such as myself, as it's a great way to develop professionally, learn from other organisations and share experience and skills as we know. So I just wonder if you could, you mentioned to me when we were preparing for this session, the Ned Life Cycle, which sets out 4 stages. You described 4 stages there, beginning with planning, which I know is very important to success from what you've told me. Can you please elaborate on that cycle for our audience?
Yes, I think that the key element is that you are moving into a new sort of career step, and I think you need to take a professional approach to the role. So I think you need to to make sure you really understand what you're getting into and what's required. We see that sort of the NED values around your sort of KPI, your knowledge, your performance, and your independence. So you do need to make sure you're up to speed with things. You need to know what's required. You need to focus on your performance, but also the performance of the board that you'll be sitting on, and also what you're bringing to the board in terms of independence and insight and a different perspective, and think about sort of the value that you're bringing to the board. And Caroline, as you said, I think the life cycle perspective is a neat way of just understanding how you move through the NED role and how you think about that sort of life cycle of what stage you're at and what you need in terms of support and help in terms of navigating that process. And the first stage is very much as you said. I think it's underplayed, but I think you need to do more planning and just step back at an earlier stage and just establish what your role is going to be, why you're taking on this role, what are your personal objectives, what are the types of organisations that you want to work with. So it's more understanding and knowledge and making sure that you're starting the process from a position of strength and really understanding, you know, what it entails for you and what you're looking for. And I think it tends to be underplayed, and people don't spend enough time just really thinking that through. The second phase, I think, is to get that first appointment, and to make sure, again, you don't underplay that process, because I think it's important to get the best role and to think about how you go about that. And some people get flattered because they're offered a role through a friend or a connection, and it may not be the best role. So don't just jump on the ladder and think, you know, I need to get my foot on the ladder to move forward. I think, again, do make sure that you do your own due diligence, make sure that there's a degree of induction and understanding of what the role actually entails. And make sure that the first appointment is the right appointment. The third phase is typically to build a portfolio. So you're taking on a number of different roles and using the first role as a bit of a stepping stone. And I think what people are doing with this is they're thinking more broadly about more of a balanced portfolio. So they may have some paid roles, but they also may have some roles in things like charities, not-for-profit organisations, things that they've got an interest in. And we very much encourage people to think about what are your areas of interest. Where are areas where you can actually add some input and value because you've got a real understanding, or you've got a real passion for that particular area of activity. So think about how you build that portfolio and how you can make sure that you've got a good balance of activity, particularly in terms of when you may be called upon to put more time and effort in. If you've got everybody or all the organisations that you work with the same year end, then you know you could struggle in terms of time commitment and requirements in terms of board meetings and other activities. So do think about how you sort of spread the load and think about how you build that portfolio, because I think it's important just to get the right balance for you. And the fourth phase is, again, I think underplayed, because what you're taking on isn't a job for life. It is on a term of office, typically a 3-year rolling term. So do think about succession planning, both for yourself, but also for the board or the boards that you'll be working on. So do plot and plan that at an early stage, and make sure again that you move on at the appropriate stage. And I think again, people are very good at looking at keeping things fresh, and particularly after about sort of a 6 to 9 year period, I think you probably fall into that camp. So it's good for you, but also good for the board. But it's also thinking about the sort of the learning and legacy that you're going to leave behind, in making sure that you've actually done your stuff and you've actually made a difference to the organisations that that you'll be working with. And also, I think if you can spread the tenure in terms of when you take on different roles, it also means that it breaks up that cycle of looking at sort of the next role and how you sort of move through building that sort of portfolio activity.
Thank you, Louis. And absolutely, and it's also important for organisations, isn't it? When they're new and they're first getting in their directors, because they all start at the same time, and then if they're on the same cycle, it's a bit of a challenge. But also, if you're in one of those situations, good for you to think, well, am I going to do a full term, or should I be one? You know, should I raise this and be one that offers to drop out a year early or stay on 1 year extra, just so that the organisation itself can get into a good cycle of refreshment, so to speak. But thank you for explaining those 4 stages. Really, really interesting. You've also talked. I've heard you talk about the boardroom framework. Can you tell us a little bit more? Explain what that is, please.
Yes, I think when you look at boards and look at how boards operate, people tend to think about the mechanics of the procedures, about more meetings and reporting and the sort of structures of what you do. I think it's important to think about the boardroom in 3 sort of main areas, and it goes back to basics. I think in terms of what is the purpose of the board. Have you got a good understanding of the roles and the objectives and the responsibilities of the board, but also the culture of the board itself? The board will have its own culture and way of operating, and the behaviours of individuals coming together is very key to that. And I think that the chair role in particular in sort of building that sort of culture within the organisation and within the board, and making sure that the board fits closely with the culture of the organisation is a key element. So I think again, a lot of boards don't really step back and articulate that in any great detail. So I think it's important just to understand, have we defined the purpose? I think the second level is to look at the people side. So obviously this is very much on the composition and the structure of the board, in making sure we've got the right people sitting around the table. They've got the right skills, they're developing the right skills, they've got the right capabilities to undertake the role. They've also got the right relationships that are part and parcel of how they operate, both internally and externally. And obviously there's a lot of focus on how boards are coming together. Some things I think we'll touch on a bit later on around sort of diversity and making sure you've got the right people. And then the third element, I think, is the procedural side in terms of meetings, reporting, making sure you've got the right knowledge and experience coming through, and also some of the ongoing development of the board in terms of how the board operates. And I think during the current sort of pandemic period, we've obviously seen quite a bit of change in terms of how boards are operating. I think people who've come on boards, taken on new appointments, have probably struggled with an induction process that has taken them into the organisation. So they've had to rely upon meeting people online and understanding sort of the culture of the organisation through that sort of online access, which can be quite difficult. And obviously with board meetings, again, very much focus of attention has been on online activity and making sure that we meet regularly, but also that we're able to communicate and to undertake the important work that needs to carry on. So I think it'll be interesting just to, understanding what the new normal is going to look like. And obviously I think it's sort of hybrid situation is going to come through strongly in terms of a balance between face-to-face meetings and the use of online meetings in terms of more efficient activity and enabling people to perhaps meet up at different times and also not just get tied down to making sure that you can all get into a room. But I think you also need to operate in that framework. I think you need to operate on a face-to-face basis as well. So I don't think we're going to abandon that that process in total. But I think it's important just to get the right balance for you as a board. So I think those three key elements of the right purpose, the right people, the right procedures really sort of set that framework. And we do some board performance and evaluation exercises, and we very much focus attention on those key areas to make sure that the board is operating effectively and that it's really fit for purpose in terms of the scope and the engagement that comes through strongly from those three key areas.
Well, they're really, really important, and it is going to be so interesting how things develop, because yeah, you can see on the one hand, it's also quite nice to be lowering one's carbon footprint. And as you said, we'll talk later about diversity and inclusion. You can reach a wider group of people if you're not meeting in person. But that in-person relationship is also important. And you mentioned values, and in the previous question, you were talking about choosing the right organisation. And I find this a fascinating one, because the research shows that we're always much happier if our own personal values are very much attuned to the organisation we're working in or for. And it's an interesting dilemma in a sense to the board, because you've got people coming from lots of other cultures all coming together. So how do you build that? And I think I often say in different boards I'm involved in, are we going to do something together socially? Are we going to, which you need face-to-face for often, not always, because if you don't really gel with everyone and get to understand what values you do share, I mean, it is a new challenge, whereas in a single organisation, people can kind of come and go, settle in, and they will make a choice based on whether they like the organisation or not, as you would do with a board. But then when you get there in the board, there's lots of different things going on and different cultures, as well as the culture of the organisation you're supporting. So I think it's absolutely fascinating. Maybe we can touch on that when we get onto the diversity point as well. But just on, and I see some questions coming in, so I'm going to go to them in a moment. But I just wanted to check up this really big one for me anyway, I think is, Ned, they have to ensure that they're fulfilling their legal responsibilities, of course, but it can make it tempting sometimes to almost take over too much control, to start to try and run the organisation yourself by becoming too operational rather than focusing on your governance role. How would you suggest one can avoid this temptation or overcome it and ensure you carry out your role properly as a non-executive director rather than an executive one?
I think it's a really good point, Caroline. I think the transition from being an ED to a NED, an executive director to a non-executive director, can be quite tricky for some people, because they're used to getting into the detail, they're used to controlling all of the information. And as a non-executive director, you are a part-time director, so you're not in the organisation all the time. But as you say, I think you're very much geared to the legal position. You are a director or a trustee of the company or the organisation, so you do take on legal responsibilities, and you do need to make sure that you're mindful of that. And I think it's also understanding that you are a director or trustee, and so you do need to think about the appointment process and an understanding of the role that's being presented to you. So as an individual, you're taking on a role, and that needs to be clearly defined and understood in terms of what's required. And sometimes I think there can be a misunderstanding in terms of the work that you're engaged in and the time commitment that's required. But I think you also need to understand that you're a board member, so you're working together as a team, and understanding how the team dynamics need to work. So you need to collaborate and work together in terms of that sort of teamwork aspect. You need to be able to challenge other people and to ask difficult questions, and to particularly hold the executive to account in terms of how the organisation is being run. I think you need to come to some degree of consensus. So you do need to work together to make decisions and to make sure you make the right decisions. But also, I think you need to be a catalyst for change. You need to bring new ideas, new perspectives into the process. And so you're sort of trying to blend both the individual and the sort of the team aspects. And the key point that I think you were making, I think it's really how do you make sure that you set the right tone and that you enter the boardroom on the basis of being a non-executive director. And I think a lot of this will also depend upon the chair in particular, in terms of setting the tone, working with you in terms of how the board operates, also talking to other directors and making sure again that you understand how the board operates, and think through the role description, but also think through your own objectives. So you should be sort of setting objectives of what you're seeking to achieve by taking on the role, and think about those in terms of how you perform, gather feedback, sense check how you're operating within the boardroom, and make sure you're bringing the right perspective into the way that you operate. I think it's important just to step back on occasions and just to make sure that sort of followed through. But I think if you've got a good chair, you will have somebody who will regularly give that type of feedback, both formally and informally, in terms of how the team is operating, how individuals are actually operating within the sort of the boardroom activities, and also just think about sort of the key attributes that you're bringing into the boardroom in terms of how you operate and the sort of the personal aspects that you might be able to bring through in terms of the key elements of what the board position is actually looking for. I think also you need to understand that as part of the role, you're probably taking on other aspects like committee roles as well, particularly from a treasurer point of view. You'll be very familiar with the numbers and with the sort of financial areas. So you may be called upon to join a board because you're somebody who's going to actually sit on an audit committee or a remuneration committee or a risk committee. So again, those are key elements that will bring you into the boardroom, and just to understand really how that plays out in terms of how you operate as a board member, and get the right level of balance between all of the detail that you may get sort of sucked into, versus being sort of more strategic, more able to sort of step back and provide more of a helicopter view of what's going on within the organisation, and then to go into perhaps more detail in those areas where you think you need more understanding of what's going on. So you can sort of go into particular areas, but you shouldn't be sort of going into every area. And really, a lot of this I think comes back to the trust of the executive versus the non-executive and board's members, because if there's a build up of good trusting relationships, then you'll feel more able to step back and to really take more of an overview of what's going on and feel comfortable that this is taking the right direction, taking shape. I think some of it also comes back to some training and education up front. So we do run a number of training programs where we help people just really assess what the NED role entails, what's required, what the sort of subtle changes are in that sort of transition from being an ED to a NED. So don't underplay that. I think it's an important thing to consider, and make sure, again, from a personal perspective, you understand how that sort of plays out and what you need to focus on in terms of the board role that you're taking on.
Thanks, Lou. Really interesting. I'll pop back in a few moments to the point around the relationship between board and executive, but we do have a question in the chat that's a little bit more detailed but relevant to the kind of role and responsibility of the non-executive. And the question is, what do you think the role of the non-executive is in terms of defining, implementing and monitoring ESG objectives for the organisation?
I think obviously ESG is the hot topic at the moment, and I think it's important to look at the three elements. I think people tend to really look at ESG as just being the E element. I think it's a combination of the of the environment, the social aspect, and the governance perspective. So it does very much play to the NED role in terms of how all of those three elements tie together. I think in the past, the NED role in particular has been sort of the guardian of good governance in terms of coming in and providing that sort of independent perspective, challenging positively, what's going on within the organisation. So I think it's now important to get the right balance between those three areas, and to use that sort of governance aspect to then link into what's required from the environmental area. So we're seeing a lot more focus of attention on the reporting requirements, on the behaviours within the organisation, links back into culture and other areas. So it's important, I think, just to sense check that. And we've been working with organisations like Chapter Zero, which is very much focused on the environment and how directors and NEDs in particular can make a difference in terms of making sure organisations got plans to take this area forward, to make sure that they're robust plans, to make sure that that they focus attention on the right areas. I think we've seen with the pandemic, the social side has come through very strongly in terms of people, and I think culture is now embedded within the corporate governance frameworks and activities that you should be focused on. So I think the social element has come through very strongly, and we've seen the NED role, particularly if you're looking at the listed company arena. I think with some of the changes that came through with the update of the code a few years ago now, there was a push for greater stakeholder engagement, particularly from employees. And I think there are now three requirements that you can, or three options that you can take in terms of engagement with employees. One is to put an employee on the board. Another is to set up an employee focused subcommittee, or to use the NED as the third option, to be a bit of a conduit between the workforce and the board. So taking on yet another role in terms of working closely with the organisation to provide some degree of independent perspective, and to make sure that all those sort of elements are coming through. So it's a very good question. I think the ESG areas need to be picked up, and I think the NED is central to those areas in particular.
Well, thank you very much again, Louis. That's very clear. And if members are in doubt, there's a lot of material we produce around ESG. So if you're not fully aware of what's happening in that space, then do catch up, because if you're planning to be a NED, you really do need to know. And thanks again for, as Louis said, that very good question. Now, going back to this relationship to the board and the executive, clearly we want the board to be effective, but sometimes there is a dynamic of warfare, it's been called, between the board members and the executive. How can we overcome that? What can you do in a situation where there is this tension that's not a very healthy tension, that's not conducive to the effective functioning of the board?
I think it comes back to some of the things I've sort of picked up on earlier on. I think the axis between the chair and the CEO positions is key to this, because the chair runs or leads the board, and the CEO runs the organisation. And if there's any discord sort of at board level between executives and non-executives in particular, then really that should be nipped in the bud by the chair and the CEO being aware of that, and actually understanding the dynamics of how the board needs to operate. And I think it goes back to what I said earlier on in terms of that sort of trust element, in terms of the board should trust the executive to get on and do their work on a day-to-day basis, and they shouldn't be asking for more and more information. So they should be able to allow the executive team to get on and run the organisation. And I think the chair should be pivotal in terms of making sure that the board operates effectively and provides the right degree of challenge and understanding of what's going on, and making sure that you've got the right people sitting around the table, working together as a team to make sure that you're focused on the right things. And a lot of this comes back to communication and making sure that the communication lines are open, and that if there are issues, that you talk about them, and that you bring them out and make sure that people feel able to do that. I think if the things are allowed to fester and operate below the surface, then you're not going to have a good board in process, and you're not going to be able to operate effectively at different levels within the organisation. But with the board reviews that we've seen, we do see this happening, and it always surprises us that you don't take the sort of simple steps of just thinking this through and really just understanding, what may be an issue. Why is there a disconnect perhaps between the board and the executive team in particular? And quite often it's coming back to basic communication skills, leadership skills from the people who are tasked with leading the board and the organisation. And I think with the chair role in particular, sometimes people sort of migrate into that position rather than being the best person. They may be in the best position at the best time to sort of take on that role, but they may not be the best person in terms of the leadership skills and the way that the board should be operating. So again, I think this should really be picked up when you undertake some sort of performance review, and just really challenge what's going on in the boardroom. Make sure you've got the right people around the table. Make sure they're operating effectively and that sort of thing. So I think it's a key area, and I think too often boards don't really step back and say, are we effective in how we're operating? Are we an effective board? And just sort of sense check that in terms of the key elements that should be in place.
Absolutely, and important for would-be NEDs and existing NEDs to think that through and help drive that review, that reflection at the appropriate time. Now, Louis, I think there's still an impression, just a general impression, say that NEDs tend to be older, more statesman-like people. But I know you're working hard to ensure that NEDs reflect the organisations they work for and wider society, which is of course important. So I and the ACT, we're firm advocates of diversity and inclusion, of course, and I know that NEDA also advocates that, the greater variety and diversity of board members. Why do you think it's so critical to get diversity in the boardroom? If it's not an obvious question, but let's hear what you have to say.
No, I think it's been top of the agenda for a lot of boards and also governance advisors for some time now. I think we've been hearing about diversity for a while, and I think as we're all aware, I think it's more than just a gender thing as well. It is covering a range of areas, and it's getting different thought perspectives into the boardroom. I think in the past it's been a concern that boards have been built in the same likeness of the chair, and the chair tends to be an older man of a certain profession. And I think that's been one of the slow changes in terms of the turnover perhaps of the chair role in particular. I seem to be gunning for chairs today, but I think that role is sort of key in terms of building the board, bringing the right people around the table, and it covers a whole range of different things. I think there's been a focus on gender. There's been a focus on the ethnic side. There's more of a focus, I think, on the social side coming through. We think age is a key element to this as well. I think we need to bring younger people onto boards. One thing we're running at the moment is a range of board development programs where we work with larger organisations to have a cohort of their executive team who can transition to work as non-executive directors or trustees in other organisations. So in parallel with their executive work, they're sponsored and supported in terms of taking on an NED role at an earlier stage, and just making sure again that you can bring some new ideas and new perspectives through that sort of approach. And it's a win-win for both the individual who gets that opportunity to work outside the organisation, to work at board level, but also for the organisation itself to bring back new skills, new thoughts, new ways of working, perhaps in terms of how that dynamic might work. So I think it's also understanding how we can tap into the right people, and I think we're finding with the organisations that are being set up, which are smaller, nimbler, focused on new activities, new business models. So I think we are getting new people coming through in terms of the business environment, but it's encouraging them to think about NED activity and to think about it earlier. I don't think it's obviously a role for sort of new graduates or anything that extreme, but I think there is an opportunity, I think, to have some degree of sort of an apprenticeship concept also, to allow people to have a look at what the board role entails, and to see what might be required. We work with an organisation called Boardroom Ready, who do some work in that area, and I think it's really just giving people confidence to think about themselves in terms of taking on a NED role, taking on a trustee role, and thinking about the sort of the timing of doing that. The other thing, though, I think that we mustn't lose sight of, and I think this has come through strongly through the pandemic, is that there are some traditional skills and skill sets that we do need to maintain. So the finance area in particular, and I think this plays very strongly for treasurers, is very much understanding the position around areas like viability of the organisation, going concern areas, which have come through very strongly in terms of the pandemic situation, and a lot of organisations reassessing their business model. So I don't think we need to say that we want a completely sort of diverse board, particularly in a situation where you may have a range of people who it's very difficult to then get a decision made because everybody disagrees with everyone else in terms of what's going on. So I think it's really looking at what do we mean by diversity and inclusion. How do we make sure that the organisation itself is married up with the board members in terms of the customers, the employees, the people who are the key stakeholders within the organisation, and make sure that we can demonstrate that the board is very aware of how it operates, and operates as a good corporate citizen, and understands how all those sort of dynamic areas come together. There was a quote that we use on our training sessions that the board doesn't want to look like a team with 5 centre forwards, with 5 people all looking the same, having the same background, having the sort of same thought process. I use the term centre forwards from a football connection. I think the women are better than the men these days at football in terms of England, and so I think it's really just understanding the concept in terms of not having the board operating around groupthink sort of mentality in terms of everybody singing the same hymn from the same hymn sheet. I think we need to make sure that we've got a good understanding of what diversity and inclusion means for us, and it's not just about ticking a box. It's not just about manipulating the situation to tick a governance box. You do need to step back and say, what do we need for this organisation? What is the best fit? Who are the best people to sit around the table? And I think you need to keep coming back to that. We need the best team, and it's really down to the leader. The board chair is the essential element of how you bring all that together, in making sure we've got the best people. Probably also working with the nomination committee chair. I think the nomination committee has been seen as this Cinderella committee, and I think it's a committee that really needs to take a bit more prominence in terms of succession planning and thinking through what the board is going to look like in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and and that's going to develop with how the organisation is moving forward in that sort of time frame as well.
Thanks, a really great response again, Louis, and yeah, really interesting. Looking at boards and thinking the value somebody with a treasury background or a finance background can bring to it in amongst the diversity, but also looking then to see who are the other board members. I remember some years back, a charity was recruiting for a member of their board. I was approached, I looked at it, and I looked at the people on the board, and I had a feeling that being the lone finance voice in that particular board, so I knew who some of them were, would not be particularly helpful, and I probably wouldn't be able to do the job I needed to do. So I declined, and it was only a matter of weeks afterwards that they came out in a big scandal because they'd had, shall we say, too strong a chair who was doing maybe her own thing. And I was so glad I was at it, because I would have been implicated, even if you can't just say, well, I'm new to this, it's not my fault. So I was quite pleased about that. The other thing I was going to mention, age is really interesting. And I was speaking to somebody who I chat with every so often, kind of mentoring relationship. And he's a property expert, but much younger than me, so I call him young, but clearly not just a graduate. And as I said to him, you should have a think about a NED role. And he straight away, gosh, I hadn't. Great, I've got time at this point in my life. I've got time to do something extra. And I said, you know, they will love your expertise. So I was really pleased to get him thinking about that. Now, we do have some more things in the chat. Just to draw everyone's attention to the fact that Louise has posted where our ESG resources are, in case people want to look that up. Now, I think Chris's question about the balance between being hands-on or hands-off operational matters and so on. I think we covered that off in the question. I think maybe the question came as we were covering that off. But Chris, if you wanted to know something more detailed, do put it again in the chat, because I'll just pass over that one for the moment, because I think it's been responded to. But if not, put something further in. And then we got Derek saying, are there still positions available for middle-aged white males from a privileged background, or should I give up now? And I feel similarly, you know, I might be female, but, you know, middle-aged white, you know, maybe not so attractive anymore.
I would say that. I think this is where you do need to do that planning piece I said earlier on, in terms of just thinking about how you position yourself and the value that you can bring to an organisation. And a lot of people come to us with CVs and ask us to have a look at their CV in terms of how they're presenting themselves. And I think every CV we have received, we've torn up and said, you need to start again. It's a very different sort of way of selling yourself. You need to really present up front your sort of USP in terms of things around strategy, things around change, areas around sort of performance development. Finance, you know, could be a key element, particularly if you know that an organisation is looking for you know, an audit committee representative or one of the other sort of financial related committees. But I think it's really how you can bring this to life in terms of things that can come out to the reader right up front, in terms of jumping out of the page, in terms of things that you've done where you've made a difference, and just listing where you've worked in sort of date order doesn't really do that. And I've seen so many CVs where you sort of get to page 3 and some really good information back there in terms of organisations you've worked with and areas that you've made a difference. So I think it's important just to think about how you are going to sell yourself in this marketplace, and to understand the marketplace as well that you're entering, because it is quite different. Roles aren't always openly advertised. Sometimes you need to go to a headhunter or an executive search firm if you're looking for a particular role, and it's really how you pitch yourself to those people as well, because they operate on the basis of working for the organisation, not for you. If they see a pound sign above your head that you're going to be somebody who will go onto a list to take to the organisation, then they'll work with you. If they see somebody who's not really clear as to what they want, doesn't articulate it very well, they'll listen to you, but you probably then won't hear from them again. So It's really understanding the types of role that you want to get into. There could also be some stepping stones that you take to get some initial roles, to get some experience of operating in boards or on committees, and then use that as a way forward in terms of then thinking about other roles that you might sort of take on sort of further down the track. But it is a challenge, and I think there are so many organisations that are looking for board members that you do need to broaden your horizons in terms of the types of organisation and where you can actually sort of slot in and where you will make a difference.
That's great advice, Louis. Thank you very much. And Neil says, Louis, you discussed both NEDA and trustee roles. Do you see these as essentially the same, or should we think about them differently?
I think they are non-executive in terms of part-time. I think the NED role is linked obviously to companies, so there will be directors' duties that you need to apply as a fully fledged director. As a trustee, you will perform a similar role, but quite often with charities in particular, you'll have a board of trustees, so all of the board may be non-executive, with the executive team reporting into the board. So the dynamic will be very different. How you operate will be different, and you'll need to be mindful of the role that you're taking on from the trustee duties that you may need to be applying. So you need to be aware of, from a trustee perspective, you need to think about the charity commission and the other sort of regulatory aspects that you're taking on. I think the point I made right at the beginning in terms of the portfolio of work, we are seeing people take on a mixed portfolio. So they will have some NED roles and they will have some trustee roles. So they will be dealing with sort of both of those elements as you develop the portfolio that you'll be looking at.
Thanks, Louis. We've got another question here before we start to round up. Richard asks, the role of a NED on UK investment funds has come in for criticism for being weak on challenging the investment manager. Do you have any advice for those who wish to pursue that NED route?
Again, I think it's understanding the dynamics of those organisations and understanding the business model that they operate, and how you have the stakeholder interaction, because again, there may be different board members who have different interaction with different stakeholders. So I think mapping your sort of stakeholder group, I think, is an important activity, which again is underplayed in terms of how you interact with those that are interested in your organisation at all levels, and who are the best people at board level to interact and to provide that sort of degree of challenge. So I don't think you should sort of shirk away from that. I think you do need to make sure that you're challenging things appropriately and effectively, but just sort of understanding the dynamics of your stakeholder relationships is an important step, and it's not undertaken, I think, in the right way or in a joined up way. So I think it's important just to think it through in that sort of context. Also, I think we're also being asked about, do I need to work in a particular industry sector that's relevant to my own experience? And one chap who comes and talks to our groups quite regularly is a very experienced banker. He's come up through Barclays and other banks and worked at a very senior level in terms of board activity. And he doesn't touch a bank anymore. He works with a whole range of different organisations, but brings the skills that he's gained through his knowledge of funding, strategy, governance, all these elements he brings to the different organisations that he works with. So don't always think about yourself in terms of, I'm only fit for purpose in one particular sector. And I think as treasurers, again, you've got a broader range of skill and experience that you can bring to a broader range of organisations. So don't really just tie your aspirations down too narrowly. and really think about the skills that you bring, particularly from your financial background, and all the situations that you've worked on that can really make a difference to how boards look at various situations, how they make decisions, particularly, as I said, going back to, what we found with the pandemic situation recently.
Thanks again, Louis. And something there around this kind of how you challenge reminds me of a quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, where she said, "You can disagree without being disagreeable," which I think is good advice for a Ned, potentially. Now, we are going to have to round up in a moment, but I've got another question here. So let's see if we can have maybe a quick response on this one. For those who have been self-employed and out of mainstream corporate for a while, where is a good place to start looking for roles?
That's a very good question. I think because roles are not always in the sort of the open sort of public domain, it again will depend upon the type of role that you're looking for, because there are a lot of specialist sort of websites and areas where you can have a look at the types of roles that are coming through. So, particularly if you're out of the sort of the mainstream areas that you're looking at. I think also a lot of people think about their networks in terms of the opportunities to talk to other people that they used to work with. So really think about your networking and up your networking to another level. I think there's three elements of networking. There's a past, a current, and a future. We tend to work in the current. I think we need to think about who are the people we used to work with who perhaps moved into other roles and situations where we could perhaps tap on their experience, and grabbing a coffee with somebody who might be able to give you a bit of a hands up or a feedback on what's going on in a particular area. I think also the future networking is a key element in terms of bringing you into contact with other people who have gone through this experience, to share that experience. And so think about other organisations that you can tap into, to go to events, to meet people, obviously, hopefully with the change in sort of face-to-face meetings that hopefully will be coming through soon. We'll get that opportunity to go back into that mode where we're able to have a chat over a cup of coffee or a drink either end of the session. But I think that sort of networking piece needs a lot more work, and do think that through and see how that sort of plays out, and then look at some of these other portals and other areas where roles are actually advertised, and give you an opportunity to sense check, are these areas that I can get involved in, and come and talk to us. People like us, we can provide some advice and support in terms of how your own sort of position may sort of play out in terms of areas that you need to consider. And the training sessions that we run are sort of one-day sessions that bring all this together. So that acts as quite a good mechanism just to think it through as well.
Great advice as usual, Louis. Thank you so much. Just as we round up, I'm going to pose a last question myself of you. If I were to ask you what makes a great Ned, what would be the first three things that spring to mind?
I think you need to be somebody who works well in a team situation, because you're just going into that sort of team environment. So you need to be comfortable working together with other people. I think you need to be a good communicator. So you need to be able to communicate things, and as I said earlier on, to communicate both internally and outside of the boardroom as well, I think is important as well. And I think you need some degree of sort of emotional intelligence in terms of your sort of empathy, respect, and interaction sort of with other people as well, so that you're able to understand people and to sense check situations as they develop. I think if you built up a career through your professional development, a lot of these things all sort of come together. I think in terms of the next stage of your career progress is then to sort of move into NED roles. And I think your training and experience with ACT and the Treasury side in particular should help you to pull all those aspects together and to help you to take that sort of step forward.
Thank you so much, Louis. We could have gone on a lot longer, but you gave an hour more with the preparation as time for us today. Really great to get your insights from, you know, the person at the heart of it all, and I'm sure our audience has really appreciated it. Thank you, audience, for being here. Thanks for those great questions that you posed, and yes, hope you have a great rest of your day, everyone, wherever you are, and just huge thanks again to Louis.
Caroline, thank you very much. If anyone wants to talk in a bit more detail, happy to have a conversation as well. So do bear that in mind. But no, thank you for the opportunity. It's been great talking to you today.
And there's lots of nice messages coming in. I'm not sure if you can see them all, Louis, but lots of thanks. Great session. Thanks for the time. Lots of nice messages coming through. So thank you for giving such nice feedback. And thanks once again, Louis. We'll close the call now, but take care, everyone. And yeah, thanks again.
Right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.